Ladies and gentlemen, Anne Marie Slaughter.
In 1841, Vardry Alexander Macby and John Franklin Hoke graduated from this great university just as you are graduating today. They are my great-great-grandfathers. They both grew up in Lincolnton, North Carolina, a small town that is about 2.5 hours west of here, destined to remain a small town after the railroad went through Charlotte. Vardry Macby is listed in the NCpedia as a lawyer, superior court clerk, and promoter of public improvements. He represented Lincoln County in the North Carolina legislature for 1 term, and he and his wife raised 10 children. John Franklin Hoke was a distinguished lawyer and a legislator in Lincolnton, and he was Adjutant General of North Carolina. Both men lived in Lincolnton all their lives. Vardry Macby's daughter, Mary Macby, married John Franklin Hoke's son, William Alexander Hoke, who was also a lawyer and grew up to be Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of North Carolina. He donated his papers to Chapel Hill. When I was in law school, I read a case written by my great-grandfather, William Alexander Hoke, and reflected on how the gene pool had deteriorated. He wrote it, and I was having a very hard time reading it. Mary Macby and William Alexander Hoke's daughter was my grandmother, Mary Macby Hoke. She grew up in Lincolnton and in Raleigh, but moved to Virginia and spent the rest of her life in Charlottesville. Let me tell you a second story, a story of Fanny Ramseur. She was also from Lincolnton. She was born a slave in 1840. She was freed in 1865 at age 15. She became a talented and respected midwife. She was hired by the Hoke family to take care of my grandmother's first cousin and then of my grandmother. She lived with my grandmother for the rest of her life, and she ran their home and property in Lincolnton when the family was in Raleigh. Let me tell you a third and final story about my grandmother, whom I knew as Ma. I loved her very dearly, and it seems appropriate to tell this story on Mother's Day. She graduated from St. Mary's School in Raleigh, but never went to college. She raised 3 children. She had an extraordinary memory and a deep love of words. She could sit down next to anyone from anywhere in the South and figure out family ties for generations back. She remembered every poem she had ever learned in school, and I can still hear her quoting long passages of everything from Shelley to A.A. Milne. Growing up, I was always so grateful that I had been born in 1958 and not in 1902, as my grandmother was, that I had so many professional opportunities. She would have been a great lawyer herself or a wonderful English professor, perhaps at Chapel Hill. I still think she would have been happier if she could have put her mind to use in a profession as well as a mother. But her love and her lessons sustain me to this day. So I've told you 3 stories. Let me now draw 3 morals from those stories. The first is that care is as important as career. Those men in my family, Vardry Hoke Macby, John Hoke Franklin, John Hoke, William Alexander Hoke, had distinguished careers. The women in my family were mothers, often very active in the community and the church. But those women enabled their sons' careers through their care, just as my grandmother enabled mine. The work of those women was just as important as the work of their husbands. Career is investing in yourselves, learning, growing, and building on the education you received here. Care is investing in others. It is learning, like a gardener or a teacher or a coach, what to do and what not to do to enable others to grow and flourish. As a society, nothing is more important to our future prosperity, security, and equality than caring properly for our children. We now know that in the first 5 years of a child's life, we are not just teaching that child knowledge, we are shaping his or her brain. What we do in those first 5 years, as was demonstrated in a famous North Carolina study, what we do in those first 5 years will determine what that child can learn for the rest of his or her life. Whether we are thinking about our military security, and the Pentagon understands this well, or our economic prosperity, or our equality as Americans, caring for our children will determine our potential as a society. But it will also determine our character and our morality and our community. Nothing is more important also than caring for those who cared for us and for the sick and disabled among us. It teaches us wisdom and patience and the ability to put ourselves in each other's shoes. We were all young. We will all be old. And we could all find ourselves sick or disabled in an instant. So care is as important as career. I look out at my parents who are here today, and I think to myself that the care that they have given me is just as important as their professional accomplishments as a lawyer and as an artist. And Mom, happy Mother's Day. The second moral is that we need to care for our caregivers. Fanny Ramseur played a vitally important role in my family and was provided for in return for the rest of her life. Today, Fanny Ramseur would not have been a midwife, but a doctor, a leader. With her talents, she's probably a CEO. But today, the majority of our paid caregivers are still poor women of color, and they are not provided for. We pay those women roughly the same as we pay people to walk our dogs, mix our drinks, and park our cars. That is wrong, and it is also deeply short-sighted. We must build an entire infrastructure of care, one that allows caregivers to be educated and professionalized and compensated and recognized. We need to allow caregivers paid leave to care for their own family members, and we need an infrastructure of care, just like our infrastructure of competition, that supports quality child care and elder care for all. The third moral of my stories: care is as important for men as it is for women. I hope it struck you as I was reading those stories just how much has changed. When my great-grandfathers graduated from this university in 1841, it was a university of all white Christian men. many of whom were slaveholders. And just look at the glorious, diverse institution it has become with a fabulous woman chancellor. Over the course of my grandmother's lifetime, women went from non-citizens, they could not vote, and really to subjects of their husbands, to roles as chancellors, as CEOs, as lawyers, doctors, engineers, and politicians. It is now time for men's lives to change as much as women's lives. Men today still find that their own families, their mothers, their fathers, their wives, define their life success in terms of what they do for a living, in terms of their professional achievements. Why should that be? Why should we expect men to stay in the traces, supporting a family, if they would rather provide care than cash? If they would want to work part-time or support their wives' careers and invest in their children? One man wrote to me and said, "I quit my company when it was clear to me that the growth potential of my children was greater than that of my company." And we know that when men look back on their lives, their first greatest regret is that they wish they'd led the lives they wanted to lead and not the lives society expected them to lead. The second greatest regret is that they wished they had spent more time with their families. It is time for men in this generation, alongside women as equals, to be bold and to break the mold of traditional expectations for how men should lead their lives, just as we have broken those expectations for how women should lead their lives. So some things will always be the same. The sky will always be Carolina blue. But change is eternal, and it falls now to you to change the world for the better over the course of your lives. So go forth. Hug your loved ones today, thank them, and hold them close to your hearts. Build on this great education and continue to learn and to grow. Strive and struggle and work really, really hard. But invest in others as much as you invest in yourselves. And always, always make room for the indispensable, precious, and priceless work of care. Thank you.